If you think you've seen the worst of prison life, you haven't seen Rikers Island. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, because what you're about to hear isn't a movie. It's real, and it's darker than anything Hollywood could ever make up. The screaming started before sunrise. Officer Raymond Hill stood in front of the metal doors of Cell Block C, his hands shaking as he gripped the handle of his baton. Inside, chaos echoed through the hall, fists slamming on steel, voices shouting, and one single voice yelling over all the others. They got him. They got Thompson. But didn't want to go in. Not again. He looked over at his partner, Officer Lena Brooks. She was pale, frozen in place. "We need backup," she whispered. But the radio on Hill's vest crackled with static. No response. The control booth above them was empty. The guards had left. Hill swallowed hard and forced the door open. The smell hit him first, sweat, blood, and something sharp like metal burning. The cells were wide open, inmates running loose, some laughing, others just staring silently. Then he saw Thompson, a young correctional officer who had been on duty for only 3 months, lying motionless on the floor, his uniform torn, his badge missing. One of the inmates, a tall man with tattoos running up his neck, leaned against the wall and grinned. "Told you, officer," he said. "In here, we run things." Hill froze. Every eye in the block turned toward him. He realized then the inmates weren't afraid. Not of the guards. Not of the rules. At Rikers, the guards are the ones living in fear. Before he could call for help, the lights flickered and the sound of footsteps filled the hall, dozens of them coming closer. Then everything went dark. 3 months earlier, Rikers Island was already making headlines. Reports of violence were pouring in, not between inmates and guards, but inmates against guards. In 1 week alone, 6 officers were sent to the hospital. The city blamed staffing shortages, broken systems, and lack of training. But those who actually worked inside the prison knew the truth. Rikers wasn't controlled by the Department of Corrections anymore. It was controlled by the inmates. Every cell block had its own mayor. A prisoner who made the rules, controlled the food, and decided who lived in peace and who didn't. And the most feared of them all was a man named Derek D. Wallace. D had been at Rikers for 8 years, awaiting trial for murder. He was big, calm, and smarter than most of the guards. He didn't yell, didn't fight. He made deals. Even some officers respected him because when D spoke, people listened. At least until new management arrived. Warden Robert Green took over in 2022, promising to clean up the island. He was strict, no nonsense, and believed in breaking the inmate gangs apart. He cut their privileges, stopped the flow of contraband, and ordered every guard to enforce discipline no matter what. For a few days, it worked. The halls were quieter. The gangs backed off. But then, a rumor began to spread that D had been moved into solitary confinement without warning. That his crew, the inmates who controlled most of Block C, were planning something big, and that the guards had no idea what was coming. Officer Hill was one of the newer guards. 26 years old, former security guard, trying to save up for college. His partner, Lena Brooks, had been there longer. 5 years, 2 suspensions, and 1 warning that she was too soft on inmates. That morning, Hill and Brooks were assigned to Block C, D's block. It was supposed to be a routine inspection, but as soon as they entered, Hill noticed something strange. None of the inmates were talking. Usually there was noise, laughter, shouting, arguments over food or phone calls. But today, silence. Everyone was just watching. Lena leaned toward him. "Something's off." Then, one of the inmates, a short man known as Bones, stepped forward and smiled. "Hey, officer," he said quietly. "You might want to check cell 214. Hill frowned. "Why?" Bones shrugged. "Because it's cold in there." Cold? The air was thick and humid. But when Hill turned the corner and opened the cell door, a blast of icy air hit his face. Inside, he saw a body. A man, tied to the radiator, frozen solid. It was Officer Thompson, the same young officer who went missing 2 days earlier. Hill stumbled back, his radio slipping from his hand. "Call it in. Call it Ian," he yelled. But Lena didn't move. She was staring down the hallway, her face drained of color. All the cell doors were open now, and every inmate was standing outside their cells, perfectly still, One of them whispered, "Welcome to Rikers." Then the alarms began to blare. That day made headlines across the country. Rikers officer found dead in mysterious attack. City officials called it a tragic, isolated incident. But those inside knew it wasn't isolated. It was a warning. Because after Officer Thompson's body was found, something changed. Guards started quitting. Inmates stopped hiding their power. And in the weeks that followed, 3 more officers disappeared. Every time the warden sent in new staff to restore order, they came out beaten, shaken, or silent. No one wanted to work Block C anymore. It was now known among guards as the Cold Block, a place so dangerous that even the most experienced officers refused to enter alone. And the one man who could stop it, Derek D. Wallace, was still locked away in solitary, laughing every night as the prison tore itself apart. Because everyone knew the Cold Block was his creation, and it was only the beginning. The day after Officer Thompson's body was found, the mood at Rikers Island changed forever. The guards walked the halls with their eyes down, their radios pressed tight to their chests. They no longer shouted commands or barked orders. They whispered. The inmates, on the other hand, moved freely, not running, not rioting, just moving like they owned the place. And in many ways, they did. The warden's orders were clear: reclaim control of Block C. But no one wanted to be the first to walk through those metal doors. The story of the Cold Block had spread fast. They said you could still feel the chill when you passed by cell 214. When Warden Green called for a meeting in the staff room, only half the officers showed up. He slammed his fist on the table. "You're letting them win," he shouted. "This is our facility." Lena Brooks raised her hand slowly. "Sir, with respect, we can't control them. They don't fear us anymore." Warden Green glared at her. "Then find someone they do fear." That night, Hill sat in his car outside the prison, unable to go home. He kept seeing Thompson's face, the way his body looked, the frost on his skin. It didn't make sense. How could a man freeze to death inside a heated cell? He didn't realize someone was approaching until a voice startled him. "You keep staring at those walls long enough, they'll stare back." It was Officer Raymond Cruz, one of the oldest guards still working the island. Cruz had survived riots, stabbings, even the blackout of 2015. They said he'd seen things no one else would talk about. Hill sighed. "I don't get it. How'd they get to him?" The cameras were off. The doors were locked. Cruz looked around, lowered his voice, and said, "Because someone let it happen." Hill frowned. "What do you mean?" Cruz lit a cigarette and leaned against the hood. "You think the inmates run this place on their own? Someone's feeding them. Phones, keys, food, information. They've been building power for years, and the higher-ups keep covering it up." Hill's stomach dropped. Why would anyone help them? Cruz smiled bitterly. "Money. Fear. Take your pick." He flicked the cigarette away and started walking toward the gate. "You want to survive here, rookie? Don't look for justice. Look for whoever's pulling the strings." The next morning, Lena and Hill were reassigned, back to Block C. "Are they serious?" Lena muttered, checking her radio. "They want us to go in there alone." Hill didn't answer. He was staring at the control booth, where a new face stood behind the glass. It was Officer Devin Cole. He'd only transferred to Rikers a month ago from another facility upstate. Rumor was he was tough, the kind of officer who didn't back down from anything. When the door buzzed open, Cole greeted them with a smirk. "Heard you two found Thompson," he said. "Rough way to start the week." Lena shot him a cold look. "You think this is a joke?" Cole shrugged. "I think it's a job. And if we don't do it, no one else will." They walked into Block C together. At first, it was quiet. Too quiet. Most of the inmates were sitting on their bunks, staring at the floor. Others whispered in corners. Then a voice echoed from the far end of the hall, deep, calm, commanding. "Officer Cole," it said. "Welcome to my house." Hill froze. It was Derek D. Wallace. He was supposed to be in solitary, but there he was, standing in the doorway of his old cell, smiling. "How the hell?" Lena began, but Cole raised his hand. "Wallace," Cole said. "You're not supposed to be here." D grinned. "And yet, here I am. Guess someone forgot to lock the door." Hill's heart was pounding. He looked around. The other inmates were watching closely, but none of them moved. It was as if they were waiting for D's signal. "Where's your warden?" D asked casually. He's been real quiet since my boy Thompson went missing. Hill stammered, "Your boy?" Dee nodded. "He worked for me, just like your buddy Cole does." The words hit like a punch. Cole's jaw tightened, but he didn't say a word. Lena stepped forward. "That's enough. Everyone back in your cells." Before she could finish, every door in the block slammed shut on its own. The sound echoed through the hall like thunder. Dee smiled wider. "See, Officer Brooks, this is what happens when you forget who's really in charge." Outside, alarms blared again. Guards scrambled through the corridors, but the system had locked down automatically. The control booth was empty. Cole had disappeared. Hill and Lena were trapped inside with 40 inmates. "Ray," Lena whispered, gripping her baton, "we need to move." Dee started walking toward them slowly. "You two look scared." "Don't be. We don't hurt people who mind their business." He stopped inches away from Hill. "But if you're working for Green, that's another story." The other inmates began to close in, surrounding the officers like a pack closing in on prey. Hill's radio crackled. Faintly, someone was yelling his name. Then the power went out again. Total darkness. A single sound echoed through the block. The metal clink of a key turning in a lock. And Dee's voice, calm and steady. "Time to clean house." Outside, Warden Green was on the phone with the mayor's office, his voice shaking. "We've lost contact with Block C," he said. "All systems down. No response from the control room." The person on the other end asked, "How many guards are inside?" Green hesitated. "2." But before he could hang up, the monitor behind him flickered back to life. Security footage from Block C. It showed Dee Wallace standing in front of the camera, holding a radio in one hand and Officer Cole's badge in the other. He looked straight into the lens and said, "You want to control? Come and take it." Then the feed cut to static. That night, Rikers Island went into full lockdown. It's what was called. Reporters flooded the gates. But no one knew what was really happening inside. Because the inmates weren't rioting anymore, they were organizing. And by the time authorities broke through the doors at dawn, the guards had already surrendered. Every one of them was on their knees in the center of the block, unhurt but defeated. And Dee Wallace was nowhere to be found. The lights in Rikers Island cell block flickered again, once, twice, and then the whole block went dark. For a few seconds, no one moved. The silence was heavy, like the air itself was afraid. Then, from the far end of the corridor, someone screamed. Officer Thomas grabbed his flashlight and ran toward the sound. "Stay back," he yelled to the other guards. The beam of light cut through the blackness, bouncing off the metal bars and landing on something red, a smear across the wall. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. It was blood. When the backup lights finally came on, chaos broke loose. Inmate Darnell Big D. Jackson, the one who ran the North Block, was lying on the floor, his shirt soaked in red. Around him, prisoners banged their fists on the bars, shouting and laughing. "He got what's coming," one yelled. "Who did this?" Thomas demanded, his voice shaking. No one answered. A guard whispered, "Sir, it looks like a shank wound. Multiple times. Must have happened during the blackout." Thomas looked around. Cameras were off. The control room had gone dark too. Whoever did it had planned it perfectly. And now Big D, the man everyone feared, was dead. But even that wasn't the most terrifying part. In the next few hours, something strange began happening inside the prison. Word spread fast. Big D's death had broken the peace. Rival gangs started fighting. Guards refused to enter certain blocks without backup. The air smelled of bleach and fear. That night, Officer Thomas sat alone in the control room, watching the flickering screens as prisoners shouted and pounded from their cells. His radio buzzed with panic. Fights in C block, stabbing in D block, fire in the laundry room. He looked up at the cracked ceiling and whispered, "This place is cursed." Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, the screams grew louder. Then, around midnight, something hit the power again. The lights went out, completely this time. And just before everything went silent, Thomas heard a voice over the radio, breathless, terrified. "They're coming for the guards. They said no one leaves tonight." The sirens wailed, echoing through the hollow corridors of Rikers Island like a warning from the devil himself. Red emergency lights flickered, turning the hallways into a nightmare of shadows and screaming faces. Officer Thomas grabbed his radio, but all he got was static. He tried again. Control, this is Unit 4. Does anyone copy? Nothing. Just a low hum that seemed to grow louder the more he listened. Then came the pounding. From every direction, fists, boots, and makeshift weapons slamming against steel doors. The inmates were breaking free. Someone must have jammed the locks when the power cut. The cell gates in the south block began sliding open one by one, metal grinding against metal. Fall back! Fall back! Shouted Officer Ruiz as she ran past him, her uniform torn at the sleeve. Behind her, a group of inmates surged down the hall, shouting like an army. Thomas grabbed her arm. Where's the rest of the team? They didn't make it out of C block, she gasped. They said the lights went out and the doors. A loud crash interrupted her. One of the cell doors flew open, slamming against the wall. An inmate, tall, bald, and covered in blood, stepped out holding a sharpened toothbrush. His eyes looked empty, almost lifeless. You guards ain't running this place no more, he said. His voice was calm, too calm. Thomas raised his baton, heart racing. Don't do this. But the man only smiled, the kind of smile that said he had nothing left to lose. Suddenly, the corridor filled with smoke. Someone had set fire to the laundry room again. The sprinklers sputtered, then failed. The heat rose quickly, and the sound of chaos swallowed everything. From the far end of the hall, a guard screamed. Thomas turned and saw a group of inmates dragging Officer Simmons across the floor. He ran toward them, but Ruiz grabbed his arm. Don't. They'll kill you too. Thomas froze. Through the smoke, he could hear Simmons pleading, please, please don't. Then a sharp sound cut him off. Thomas clenched his fists, his mind spinning. Rikers Island had turned into a war zone, and no one was coming to save them. He looked down the hallway, red lights flashing, water dripping, shadows moving like ghosts, and realized something chilling. Every block had gone silent. Ruiz whispered, "Why did it stop?" Thomas raised his flashlight slowly, scanning the hall. Then he saw it, dozens of inmates standing perfectly still at the far end of the corridor, watching them, not moving, not speaking, just watching. And one of them stepped forward, the same inmate who'd killed Big D earlier that night. His hands were covered in blood, but his face looked calm. You guards should have stayed out, he said. This is our prison now. Thomas took a step back. You don't want to do this. The man smiled again, showing cracked teeth. Oh, I already did. Behind him, flames flickered higher, painting the walls orange. The heat made the air shimmer, and in that instant, Thomas realized something else. The exits had been sealed. They were trapped inside with hundreds of violent men. And outside, no one even knew the island was burning. The night sky above Rikers Island glowed orange, a sick reflection of the chaos burning within. Smoke drifted across the East River, but from Manhattan's bright skyline, it just looked like another storm on the horizon. No one knew that inside the island's walls, law and order had completely collapsed. Officer Thomas pressed his back against the wall, coughing hard as smoke filled his lungs. The emergency lights flickered, throwing flashes of red across the corridor. He could hear the sound of footsteps approaching, fast, heavy, and many. We have to move, Officer Ruiz whispered, her voice trembling. They're sweeping the lower tiers. Thomas nodded and motioned for her to follow. They slipped into a service tunnel behind the laundry room, the one used by maintenance workers. The air was hot and smelled of burnt plastic. Somewhere above them, metal banged against metal. Do you think anyone's still in control? Ruiz asked. Thomas gave a bitter laugh. At Rikers, no one's ever in control. Not anymore. As they crept through the tunnel, the faint sound of a radio crackled to life. Thomas froze and listened. A voice, faint but panicked, came through. This is Control. Block D has fallen. I repeat, D block is gone. Multiple officers down. Inmates armed with shanks and tools from the workshop. We need immediate backup. Then static. Ruiz whispered, Oh my God. If D block's gone, that's half the island. Suddenly, the wall beside them shook violently. A muffled explosion followed. The lights went out, plunging them into darkness. What was that? She gasped. The kitchen, Thomas said. Gas lines. They stumbled forward with only the dim glow of Thomas's flashlight to guide them. Every step echoed like thunder in the silence. Then they heard voices from ahead, angry, echoing through the narrow passage. "Keep your light off," Thomas whispered. Through the darkness, they saw 3 inmates dragging a guard's uniform, laughing. The guard wasn't moving. Thomas clenched his jaw and tightened his grip on the baton. He whispered, "We're not going to make it through this tunnel. We need another route." They backed away slowly, but then a voice called from behind them, low and raspy. "Going somewhere, officer?" Thomas turned fast. Out of the shadows stepped the bald inmate from earlier, the same one who'd led the riot. His eyes glowed faintly in the red light. Behind him stood 2 more inmates, both armed. "You know what the funny thing is?" the man said, stepping closer. "They built this island to break us, but all they did was teach us how to survive without them." Thomas kept his voice calm. "You don't have to do this." The man smirked. "You still don't get it, do you? You're the prisoner now." Before Thomas could move, one of the inmates swung a wrench. It hit the wall inches from his head, sending sparks flying. Ruiz screamed and kicked a loose pipe toward them. It clattered loudly, echoing through the tunnel. Thomas grabbed Ruiz's hand and bolted down the opposite corridor. They could hear the men chasing them, their footsteps getting louder. The tunnel split ahead, left or right. "Which way?" Ruiz shouted. Thomas hesitated for half a second, then took the right. They burst through a metal door that led into the old storage area of the administrative building. Boxes and broken furniture were stacked to the ceiling. They slammed the door shut and pushed a metal cabinet against it. The banging started immediately. Boom, boom, boom. "Open up, officer. Don't make us break it down." Ruiz was shaking now. "They're going to kill us, Tom. We're trapped." Thomas looked around frantically. His flashlight landed on a small ventilation shaft near the ceiling. "There," he said. "Help me up." They climbed into the shaft just as the door gave way. The cabinet flew forward, crashing to the floor. The men stormed in, their flashlights sweeping the room. "Find them," the bald man barked. Inside the vent, Thomas and Ruiz crawled slowly, barely breathing. Sweat dripped from their faces as the sound of boots echoed below. One wrong move, one noise, and it would be over. Suddenly, a voice came through the vent from somewhere ahead, a soft whisper. "Hey, over here. You're not the only ones hiding." Thomas froze. Ruiz's eyes widened. Someone else was in the vents, and they sounded like they'd been there a long time. The voice was low and cracked, like someone who hadn't spoken in days. It echoed softly through the narrow vent. "Don't move too fast," the stranger whispered. "They'll hear the metal if you crawl wrong." Thomas froze. Ruiz's breathing grew louder, trembling with fear. "Who are you?" Thomas whispered back. A pause. Then the voice said, "Name's Henson. I used to be a guard here, before everything went to hell." Thomas's eyes widened. "A guard? How long have you been hiding?" 3 days, Henson replied. "I know these tunnels better than anyone. You picked the right one, but if you keep going straight, it'll take you right to the yard. And you don't want to end up there." "It's theirs now." "The yard," Ruiz whispered. "You mean the inmates?" "They run it," Henson said, cutting her off. "They got the gates welded shut, patrols with makeshift weapons. Even the CEOs who surrendered, they're being used to keep order for them. The chain of command? Gone." The words sent a chill through the tunnel. Thomas could hear faint screams somewhere in the distance, followed by what sounded like cheering. "They're celebrating something," Henson said darkly. "Probably another one of us down." Thomas clenched his jaw. "There's got to be a way out." "There is," Henson said, "but it won't be easy. The only clear path is through the old medical wing. It connects to the ferry loading dock. If we can get there, we can signal for help." Ruiz whispered, "Then let's move." They followed Henson's voice deeper into the vent. The metal creaked under their weight, and every sound felt deafening. The air was thick with dust and the faint smell of rust and smoke. Finally, they reached a grate. Henson lifted it quietly, motioning for them to drop down into a dark hallway. The old medical wing. The walls were pale green, peeling, and stained with age. Stretchers and wheelchairs lay abandoned, and the emergency lights flickered dimly. It looked like a place time had forgotten. Henson limped as he led the way, holding a small flashlight. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. You said you were a guard, Thomas said. How did this start? Henson stopped walking and stared at the floor. It started small, too small for anyone to care. Fights between inmates, guards getting threatened. Then food shipments stopped coming in on time. We were understaffed, running double shifts. They outnumbered us 20-1. He turned slowly to face them. When the blackout hit that night, the whole island went dark. Cameras died, locks failed, and the inmates realized we were just as trapped as they were. Ruiz swallowed hard. So they took over. Henson nodded, and they've been running it ever since. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the far end of the hallway. Thomas raised his flashlight. A shadow darted past the doorway ahead. Did you see that? Ruiz whispered. Before anyone could answer, a voice shouted from the darkness, deep and mocking. Well, look who we got here. Thought you could hide forever, Henson. Henson froze. His hand trembled. No, he whispered. Not him. From the shadows stepped a tall inmate with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. His prison uniform was torn, his hands wrapped in tape. Name's Reggie, he said, grinning. Remember me, guard? You left me bleeding in the showers last year. Guess who's running the medical wing now? Thomas stepped forward instinctively, but Henson stopped him. Don't. He's dangerous. Reggie laughed. Dangerous? You should see what we've done downstairs. The ones who fought back, they didn't make it. He took a slow step closer, dragging a metal pipe along the wall. Sparks danced across the floor. Ruiz whispered, we have to run. But there was nowhere to run. Reggie lifted the pipe and pointed it toward Thomas. You ain't going anywhere. Not till I pay back what your kind did to me. Thomas looked around frantically, then spotted a defibrillator on the floor beside a stretcher. Its power light flickered faintly. As Reggie swung the pipe, Thomas grabbed the defibrillator paddles and pressed them together. The device buzzed to life. He turned and slammed them against Reggie's chest. A burst of blue light flashed, and Reggie screamed as his body convulsed, the metal pipe clattering to the ground. The lights flickered and then went out completely. Darkness swallowed them whole. Ruiz whispered, Tom, where's Henson? But there was no answer. Only silence. Then from the dark, Henson's voice came again. Only this time it was calm and cold. You shouldn't have done that, he said quietly. Now they'll know exactly where we are. And then, footsteps. Dozens of them. Getting closer. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the long corridor like a stampede. The air felt heavier, each breath sharp and quick. Ruiz grabbed Thomas by the arm, whispering frantically, they're coming from both sides. Thomas scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of light. There, by the gurney, he whispered. The stairwell. They sprinted toward the metal door, their shoes slipping on the damp floor. Henson followed close behind, clutching his flashlight. The echo of shouting inmates filled the hall. The sound of iron pipes and chains rattled closer. Thomas slammed into the door, shoulder first. It barely budged. He tried again. Then Henson stepped forward, swinging the flashlight handle against the lock until it cracked open. The three of them burst into the stairwell. The sound of footsteps faded behind them as they climbed upward, lungs burning, fear driving every step. Where does this go? Ruiz gasped. The roof, Henson panted. There's an old vent shaft. We can climb out through it. From there, we might catch sight of the ferry dock. The stairwell creaked with every step. Dust fell from the ceiling as faint voices echoed from below. Thomas could hear Reggie shouting orders, his voice still raw from the shock. Find them. They went up. Henson turned to Thomas, his face grim. They won't stop. Not until we're dead. They think taking out a guard means freedom. They don't understand. Nobody gets off this island. They reached the top landing. The roof door was chained, but through a small gap, Thomas could see daylight breaking over the East River. He yanked the chain hard. Help me. Together, they pulled until the chain snapped loose. The door swung open with a shriek. Cold air rushed in, carrying the salty scent of the water. They stepped onto the roof, gray clouds above, gulls circling, and the city skyline faint in the distance. It felt like freedom was only a few miles away. But then they saw it. Below them, the prison yard was filled with chaos. Fires burned in trash cans. Dozens of inmates gathered around, cheering and waving stolen batons. A group of guards stood on the outer wall, hands raised, being forced to follow inmate orders. Rikers Island wasn't a prison anymore. It was a kingdom ruled by fear. Ruiz whispered, "They've taken over everything." Thomas's voice cracked. "This isn't just a riot. It's a collapse." Suddenly, a shot rang out. A bullet hit the metal near Ruiz's head. "Sniper!" Henson shouted, diving behind a vent shaft. "They've got lookouts on the south tower." Thomas ducked low, scanning the rooftop. His eyes locked onto the rusted vent shaft that Henson mentioned earlier. It was wide enough for one person at a time. "You first," Thomas told Ruiz. She hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you," he said firmly. She climbed in quickly, disappearing into the vent. Thomas turned to Henson. "Go!" But Henson didn't move. He looked out over the yard, expression heavy with guilt. "I can't," he said quietly. "I started this. I covered for the officers who were running the fights. I looked the other way when inmates were punished for speaking up. This," he gestured toward the chaos below, "this is on me." Thomas grabbed his arm. "You didn't kill anyone, Henson, but you can help stop this. Let's go." Henson hesitated. Then another gunshot whizzed past, grazing the vent shaft. He gave a faint smile. "You get her out. Tell the truth. Don't let them bury what happened here." Before Thomas could respond, Henson turned, raised his flashlight, and sprinted toward the edge of the roof. He shouted down at the yard below, drawing the inmates' attention. "Hey, over here." The moment the crowd turned, Thomas pulled the vent lid shut and dropped inside. He could hear the roar of chaos above, the sound of dozens of inmates shouting, followed by gunfire. The tunnel twisted downward, steep and narrow. Ruiz was waiting near the end, shaking. "Where's Henson?" Thomas didn't answer. He simply said, "Keep moving." They crawled until they reached the vent's exit, where daylight filtered through the rusted grate. On the other side lay the old ferry dock. Thomas kicked the grate open, and they stumbled out into the cold air. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. NYPD and Coast Guard patrols finally closing in. As they made their way toward the dock, Ruiz turned back one last time. The massive gray walls of Rikers loomed over the island, smoke rising from inside. "Do you think anyone else made it out?" she asked. Thomas looked down at the ground, then at the sky. "Doesn't matter. The world needs to know what's been happening there." Minutes later, they reached the dock. Thomas waved desperately as a patrol boat approached. Armed officers leaned over the side, shouting commands. "Hands up! Identify yourselves." Thomas lifted his hands high. "Officers, we're correctional staff, Spring Block. We have survivors and evidence." As they were pulled aboard, Thomas looked back one final time. From the distance, the prison looked calm again, silent, still, almost peaceful. But both of them knew the truth. Inside those walls, Rikers had already fallen. It wasn't a prison anymore. It was a world ruled by its own brutal laws, a place so violent even the guards feared to enter. And as the boat drifted away, Thomas could still hear the echo of inmates chanting from deep within the island. It wasn't over. Not yet. He turned to Ruiz. "They'll call it a riot," he said softly. "But it was more than that. It was revenge." She nodded slowly. "And now it's our turn to tell the world." The sirens faded. The waves carried their voices toward the city skyline. And with that, the story of Rikers Island's darkest night would soon reach every television screen and courtroom in America. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for what's coming next. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and turn on notifications, because the next story dives even deeper into the darkest corners of the world's most dangerous prisons. This was inside Rikers Island, the prison so violent even guards fear to enter. Stay curious and stay safe.